There's no question whether the 3080 Ti can play games in VR or not. The question is, how well does it play games in VR? And that's what we'll be taking a look at. For this video, I've paired the Aorus RTX 3080 Ti Master with a Ryzen 9 5950X CPU and 64GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 3200MHz CL16 RAM. Now, let's dive in. The first game we're taking a look at is Vader Immortal. This is an older title, but still a very popular one, because it's Star Wars, and it's Vader. I started my test off at my go-to render resolution of 4704 by 2384 and a refresh rate of 90 Hz. I set the graphics quality in the game to high, and at these settings, the 3080 Ti handled this game without even breaking a sweat, just as I thought it would. Since we still had a ton of performance headroom at this resolution and refresh rate, I decided to crank things up in the Oculus app and see how far we could go. I maxed out the render resolution at 5408 by 2736 and set the refresh rate to 120 Hz, and as you can see, the 3080 Ti still wasn't even phased. It was easily able to maintain 120 FPS, and our performance headroom only dropped by about 10%. Which I felt was
most impressive.
Now, die.
Next, I fired up another game I knew the 3080 Ti would absolutely crush, Beat Saber. Once again, I started off at a render resolution of 4704 by 2384 and a refresh rate of 90 Hz. In the game's graphics settings, I set everything to its highest value, the rendering scale to 1.8, but turned anti-aliasing off, because when running games at this high a resolution, you really don't need it on. Not to mention, anti-aliasing can impact GPU performance a fair amount, so turning it off with the resolution and render scale set as high as I had it actually made the graphics look better in Beat Saber and improved performance. With tons of performance headroom to spare, I then decided to do like I did with Vader Immortal and cranked the render resolution up to 5408 by 2736 and set the refresh rate to 120 Hz, which the 3080 Ti still had no problem with whatsoever. Another game the 3080 Ti was able to crush was Contractors. This game is my go-to VR shooter. I love its fast-paced gameplay, and it has a metric crap ton of mod maps you can add to it, giving the game an incredible amount of replay value. At 4704 by 2384 and 90 Hz, with all the game settings set to Ultra, except for anti-aliasing, which I set to low, you can see the 3080 Ti was spitting out a constant 90 FPS, with performance headroom hovering in the high 70s to low 80s. This, of course, meant I needed to crank things up to 5408 by 2736 and 120 Hz. And even then, the 3080 Ti crushed this game. As you can see on the performance graphs, we had a pretty consistent 120 FPS frame rate with plenty of performance headroom left to spare. Moving on to one of VR's more popular titles that I only recently picked up and haven't had much time to really play through yet, is The Walking Dead: Saints and Sinners. I started out with the Oculus render resolution set to 4704 by 2384 at 90 Hz and set the pixel density in the game to 150%, and all the other settings to Ultra, but turned anti-aliasing off, which kept things looking super crispy. At these settings, the 3080 Ti had no problem whatsoever with this game. The performance headroom did drop quite a bit though during moments like this, when I was taking on some walkers with a screwdriver, so I decided not to push things any further by increasing the resolution or refresh rate, although I probably could have had I lowered the pixel density and some of the other settings. That being said, at the settings I tested at, this game looks incredible and runs nice and smooth. Next up, we have Red Matter 2. This is a really good looking game. The only in-game graphics options you can adjust are the resolution scale, which I set to 1.8, and indirect and dynamic shadows, which I both set to on. And at 4704 by 2384 and 90 Hz, the 3080 Ti performed really well. Depending on the lighting effects going on in a particular scene though, the performance headroom would drop down pretty far and cut into our frame rate a little bit. Thanks to how the compositor works though, I never noticed any dip in the frame rate while in the headset, and as you can see on the graphs, these performance dips were very brief. Just for giggles, I turned the in-game resolution scale down to 1.5 and increased my Quest 2's refresh rate to 120 Hz, leaving the render resolution at 4704 by 2384. And again, the 3080 Ti performed like a champ. The majority of the time it delivered a constant 120 FPS, but just like at 90 Hz, when there were scenes like this one with more complex lighting effects going on, our performance headroom quickly evaporated, and while looking at this particular scene, dropped our frame rate below 120 FPS. But also just like at 90 Hz, the gameplay in the headset still felt smooth, and as soon as I turned my head away from these rockets and continued on with the game, the frame rate jumped right back up. Bone Lab was only recently released, so this is another game I have only spent a couple hours playing and haven't gotten very far into yet. The parts of the game I've played so far, though, I've been playing at 4704 by 2384 at 90 Hz. In the in-game settings, I've set MSAA to 1x, SMAA to disabled, render scale to 1.0, and level of detail bias to 2.0. All the other settings I've set to their maximum value, and as you can see, this has pushed the 3080 Ti pretty close to its limits, but it's still maintaining a constant 90 FPS. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed with this performance because overall I don't feel like Bone Lab is all that visually impressive. But it is a pretty physics-heavy game, so since the GPU has to do a lot more calculating of that stuff, I'm guessing that's why our performance is lower in this game than it is in a game like Red Matter 2, which has much more stunning visuals in my opinion. Continuing on the trend of games I've only recently started playing, Lone Echo 2 is a phenomenal game. It's a visual feast for the eyes, and story and gameplay-wise, it's fantastic. It's also one of the few games I tested that really pushed the 3080 Ti right to the edge of its capabilities. Since I like my graphics sharp and crisp, I set the render resolution to 4704 by 2384 and my Quest 2's refresh rate to 90 Hz. In the game's graphics settings, I set multi-sample anti-aliasing to none, temporal AA to disabled, the render scale to 150%, and all other settings to their maximum values. This resulted in what you see on screen right now. Normally, I don't like pushing the performance headroom this close to zero, but so far, this game doesn't seem to get the drastic dips like I've experienced in other games, so using these settings has been working out just fine for me. The worst performance I saw was in this area where there was some complex lighting and volumetric effects, but as you can see, performance was still good, and I can attest that in the headset, visuals were super sharp and the frame rate was smooth. Next up is the most hardware-intensive game I know of, Microsoft Flight Simulator. This game is absolutely insane. It has amazing visuals. But at the same time, even to run it on a monitor, you need some serious hardware, and taking it into VR is even more demanding. I spent hours messing around with different settings, trying to get this game to run at an acceptable frame rate, and in the end, I kinda just threw my hands up out of frustration and set the render resolution in the Oculus app to its lowest value of 2432 by 1216. And the refresh rate to 72 Hz. In the VR graphics settings in Flight Simulator, I set everything to its lowest value, and at first tried using DLSS quality for the anti-aliasing to see what that would do for us, and while it did help give us better performance, it made the graphics look really blurry when combined with the 2432 by 1216 render resolution. I then turned anti-aliasing off and cranked the render scale in the game to 200 to try and increase the visual clarity, and it did sharpen things up quite a bit, but our performance headroom took a big hit, and I wasn't able to get the frame rate to consistently stay at 72 FPS. The 3080 Ti would manage it at times, but as you'd look around, the frame rate was regularly dropping below our target of 72 FPS. And this was in the training flights, where there wasn't very much complex geometry for the GPU to draw. When I took it to New York City for a flyover, things got much worse. I want so bad to be able to play Flight Simulator at max settings in VR because it would be amazing. But I don't think even the recently released RTX 3090 can do it. To end this video on a positive note, let's take a look at Half Life Alyx. This is not only a great looking game, but is the best VR game to be released so far, in my opinion. At 4704 by 2384 and 90 Hz on the game's Ultra Fidelity Performance Option preset, the 3080 Ti delivered an absolutely fantastic experience. The game looks absolutely amazing at these settings, and the 3080 Ti kept us at a constant 90 FPS with just enough performance headroom still available to make me feel warm and fuzzy inside. So, returning to our question at the beginning of the video, how well does the 3080 Ti play games in VR? Other than Flight Simulator, it plays VR games very well.
I guess it isn't.
Oh, yeah. That does make more sense.